Okay, so welcome everybody. It's 12 o'clock now, so we are going to get started. Thank you so much for tuning in for our Nutrition Month webinar on eating well for gut health. My name is Nicole Del Fiacco, and joining me is Melissa Dunlop, and we're both registered dietitians here at the Niagara North Family Health Team. So today's webinar will be recorded, and we're going to be posting it on our Niagara North Family Health Team website under Patient Resources. So because it's being recorded, you are not going to be on camera and your mics will be muted. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, we just ask that you type them into the question and answer box, and then we will try to answer as many of those as we can by the end of the webinar. So before we get started, we just want to mention that today we're going to be discussing general dietary recommendations for gut health and our gut microbiome. So this information is not intended for people who have specific gastrointestinal conditions such as Crohn's disease or colitis or irritable bowel syndrome, where more specialized diets are sometimes needed. Okay, so in today's webinar, we're going to be talking about what are the signs to look for healthy digestion, what is our gut microbiome, and why is maintaining gut health so important? We're going to talk about some of the conditions that could be linked with changes in our gut health. And we're going to talk about what are prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics, and when should they be used. And then lastly, we're really going to be focusing on some of the specific dietary changes that we can make to help support and strengthen our gut microbiome. So our digestive systems are very complex, and they're made up of this long tube that extends about 30 feet from our mouth to our anus. And there are other organs that are involved in digestion, like the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. And their job is to help us to break down and digest and absorb different nutrients from our food. So within our digestive tracts, we have trillions of microorganisms living here. And today we're mainly going to be focusing on the significant population that lives in our large intestine, also known as our colon. So a lot of us might be wondering, okay, so what are the signs of healthy digestion? So this list comes directly from the Canadian Digestive Health website, and it explains that some of the good signs of digestion would be things like having proper hunger and fullness cues, being able to eat most foods without having discomfort or digestive upset after eating, not often burping unless maybe you've had a larger meal or you've consumed some carbonated beverages, being able to eat a variety of plant-based foods and fermented foods, and then having on average about 1 to 2 bowel movements per day without the need to strain, and most of them should really kind of look like a long, soft snake. And then in general, just being able to tolerate most foods. So on the contrary, some signs that digestive health might be a little bit off would be things like waking up feeling bloated or not being able to eat in the morning, regularly having like bloating or discomfort after eating throughout the day. Your bowels are not moving daily, or sometimes you have to strain to pass a bowel movement, or it might be the other way, where you're having kind of urgency and more frequent bowel movements, up to more than 3 a day. And then again, overall, just kind of having a lot of food sensitivities or intolerances. Now, when it comes to red flags, so these would be things that if you're experiencing them, you really should be talking to your doctor about it. That would be things like unintended weight loss, severe abdominal pain and or fever, if you're noticing any blood in your stool, or if you're waking in the night to have bowel movements. Okay, so we wanted to show you here the Bristol stool chart because this is what the medical community uses to help understand bowel movements. So instead of just saying to your doctor, I'm having hard or soft bowel movements, you could actually use this as a guide to specifically describe what your stool is looking like, and it can help the medical community kind of understand what might be going on with you. So type 4 in this chart is considered ideal. And as we mentioned, it generally should be kind of soft, like a long snake. Brown is the typical color, although color can vary depending on what we've ate. So for example, if one day you consumed a lot of beets, you might notice for the next day or two that your poops might have a pink or a reddish tinge to them. And then when it comes to stool frequency and transit time, this really can differ from person to person and even within the same person, depending on what you've ate, because some foods are digested quicker than others. So the concern generally comes from if there's a sudden change in what's your usual. So again, if you normally have one bowel movement a day and then all of a sudden you're going several days without having bowel movements, or you're consistently having frequent urgent type bowel movements, then you should be consulting with your doctor. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are these trillions of microorganisms that are living in our body, and the most concentrated numbers can be found in our gut. And these microorganisms are made up of mostly bacteria, but also some fungi and viruses. And essentially, it's their job to kind of all work together to help support and maintain our health. And what research has found is that there are certain lifestyle and environmental factors that can affect our gut microbiome in either a positive or a negative way. And that's things like stress, our diet, exercise, sleep, antibiotic use. And we're going to get into all of those things throughout today's webinar. So the development of our gut microbiome begins from the moment that we're born. So we know that things such as how we're born, so whether we were delivered full term or preterm, naturally versus cesarean, what we were fed, so whether we were breastfed versus formula fed, what types of solids we were exposed to, and then who and what we interacted with in those first few years of life. So were there pets in the home, our siblings, our parents, what was their gut bacteria microbiome like, because that affected the development of ours. And so it's in the first 3 years of our lives that our gut microbiome is just very rapidly changing and developing. And then by about 3 years old, that does start to stabilize and represent that of like an adult. But as I said, there are things that we can do that can either help this gut microbiome to flourish or to disrupt it. So when it comes to the role of our gut microbiome, it's involved in so many different things in our body. And we've kind of summarized that here under 3 main categories. So the first is that our gut microbiome helps us to break down nutrients that we couldn't really digest on our own otherwise, like certain fibers, for example. And this process is actually what allows for the growth of diverse and beneficial bacteria. Also, through the fermentation of fiber by our gut bacteria, they produce these compounds that are very important for our health, like short-chain fatty acids. And these compounds play a really important role in maintaining our gut barrier function, which is basically our body's first line of defense against anything that comes in through the gut. These short-chain fatty acids are also really important for helping immune function. They kind of act as anti-inflammatory helpers, and they also provide fuel for our gut cells. The other thing that our gut microbiota can do is actually synthesize certain vitamins. So they can actually create vitamin K and some of the B vitamins. Secondly, there's a direct connection between our brain and our gut, and it's called the gut-brain axis. And so certain hormones, energy level, and our mood can all be impacted by the bacteria that's in our gut. So for example, there are certain types of bacteria or microorganisms that can actually produce certain neurotransmitters like GABA and serotonin. And GABA is really important for calming our body. And then serotonin plays a role in helping to regulate mood, sleep, and appetite. Now, the third function of our gut microbiota is to really help our body's immune system. So it helps our body to tell the difference between dangerous disease-causing microbes, and then it also helps our body to know not to attack itself. Also, through digestion and fermentation, our gut microbes produce compounds that help to reduce inflammation, helps to protect against harmful pathogens, and also, again, helps to maintain that gut barrier function. So as you can see by this chart here, we've summarized some of the conditions that research has shown may be associated with changes in our gut microbiome. So here we have inflammatory bowel disease, mental health like depression and anxiety, celiac disease, fatty liver, colorectal cancer, cardiovascular disease, irritable bowel syndrome, also known as IBS, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. So studies show that not only do different conditions appear to be associated with certain types of microbes that are more prevalent in some people's gut microbiome, but also the compounds that these microbes are producing. So for example, some compounds could actually be associated with increased inflammation or decreased gut barrier integrity. And what research is still kind of trying to figure out is, what comes first? Is it the changes in our gut microbiome that are leading to or contributing to these diseases? Or is it the disease that's causing certain changes in our microbiome? Because if you think about it, with a lot of these conditions, oftentimes part of the management would be lifestyle changes or changes in our diet. And as we're going to see throughout this presentation, those diet changes can have an impact on our gut microbiome. So as I mentioned, outside of diet, there are several lifestyle factors that can impact our gut microbiome. So we're going to go through what some of those are, because it's been found that these factors, along with our environment and our diet, can actually have a greater impact on our gut microbiome than genetics does. So when it comes to exercise, the research is really around intensity. So for the average person, engaging in aerobic exercise actually has been associated with increased diversity in good bacteria. But for very strenuous or like exhaustive type exercise, so exercise that you might think of like some athletes engaging in, it could actually reduce diversity and increase intestinal inflammation. So as long as we're not engaging in that type of exhaustive exercise, exercise is good for our gut microbiome. And most of us can probably assume that when it comes to antibiotic use, unfortunately, we can't just target that bad bacteria. So we end up killing off good bacteria as well, which then ends up affecting diversity. With high stress levels, we know that our beneficial bacteria can decrease and our gut barrier function can become compromised. Also, if we think about when we're stressed, for some of us, it can actually impact our eating, right? We might turn to comfort food. And when we think of comfort foods, tends to be higher in salt, fat, sugar, and lower in fiber. And so those diet changes that can be associated with stress might also play a role in those changes we're seeing in the gut microbiome. Studies that are looking at the impact of cigarette or e-cigarette smoking consistently show that it's associated with reduced diversity of our gut microbiota. And likewise, individuals who suffer from alcohol dependence have been shown to have decreased microbial diversity and decreased good bacteria. So lastly, when it comes to sleep, microbial dysbiosis or disruptions have been observed in people who have sleep disturbances or disturbances in their natural circadian rhythm. So a good example would be like if we go away traveling and there's a time change, that's kind of disrupting that natural circadian rhythm. Or if we're a shift worker and we're having different times where we're going to sleep and it's not consistent, that can also disrupt those sleep times. Okay, so I have a true and false question here for you, Melissa. So would you say that all probiotics are the same?
Okay, that's a great question, Nikki. And I would say the answer to that would be false, that not all probiotics are the same. And when I'm thinking about choosing a probiotic, it actually makes me think about choosing a pet. So when I think about wanting a pet, I thought, I want a dog, not a cat. And you can go to the next slide, Nikki.
Okay.
And further to that, Okay, I know I want a dog. What type of dog do I want? Well, I knew I wanted a cockapoo. So being even more specific than that, I knew I wanted an F1B cockapoo. And so that is a cockapoo crossed back with a purebred poodle, and it creates a cockapoo that is lower in shedding. So it was very specific. So kind of a loose example, but it shows you a little bit about how specific we have to be when we're choosing a probiotic. So we move to the next slide. Okay, so here is an actual probiotic example. So lactobacillus is a common bacteria found in our intestine, and there's many lactobacillus supplements out on the market. So you have the genus of lactobacillus, but then you also have all of these species. So there's several different species of lactobacillus. So to take, for example, L. rhamnosus, as you can see, there's also several strains of L. rhamnosus. So probiotics are very strain specific. So very similar to picking out your dog and wanting that specific F1B cockapoo, you have to pick out a very specific strain of probiotic. So L. rhamnosus GG is used for prevention of travelers associated diarrhea, for IBS. Those are some of the things that conditions that strain is used for, and there's several more. Whereas when we look at rhamnosus GR1, that probiotic is actually helpful for vaginal health, so prevention of bacterial vaginosis and candida. So you can see that there's very different effects depending on what strain you're choosing. So it's really important that you get the strain that you want to treat the condition that you're trying to treat. So you can go on. So actually, we'll back up. Sorry,
Yeah.
we'll back up.
Okay.
I just missed something there. So yeah, so lactobacillus rhamnosus was actually one of the first probiotics or bacteria to be patented. One of the common brand names would be Culturelle. And another example, I was just thought of another example would be E. coli. Right. So we know that if you have an E. coli, certain strains of E. coli would cause a lot of illness, right? You could become very, very sick. Whereas other strains of E. coli actually live happily in our gut microbiome and don't cause us any problems. So, so that's just, again, another example of being strain specific. So note that probiotic supplements are not safe for everyone. So people that are immunocompromised or critically ill patients, it's really important to talk to your doctor before choosing a probiotic or taking a probiotic. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. All right, so what are probiotics? So probiotics are live bacteria that we're adding to our intestine, and they mainly come in supplement form. There are some food-based sources of probiotics, so that would be something like Activia yogurt, where there's actually a very specific strain of probiotic added to that yogurt. We also know that probiotics are dose specific, so they're not only strain specific, but also dose specific. So you have to get the right amount and the right strain for the condition that you're trying to treat. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of different conditions where probiotics have been shown to be beneficial, and they're learning more and more about different ones. So again, prevention of antibiotic-associated diarrhea, IBS, or just to name a few. So if you're choosing a probiotic, it's good to talk to your healthcare provider to find out which one you should choose. We also often use a website called probioticchart.ca. So this is a probiotic chart. I really like it because it gives you your brand name. It gives you specifically the strain as well as the dosage. And it also gives you the level of evidence for that probiotic. So what kind of studies were done and whether it was shown to be helpful or not. So that's probioticchart.ca. So probiotic, again, we've got those good bacteria. Probiotics are actually a supplemental form of adding good bacteria to our intestine. Then we move on to prebiotics. So prebiotics are really where our diet comes in, because this is the food that we can feed that good bacteria. So prebiotics are compounds in our food that can't be digested by our body's enzymes, so they reach the colon intact. And that's where they're fermented by that good bacteria, and they're producing something called postbiotics. So that's what you can see next. So postbiotics are those health promoting compounds that Nikki talked about earlier when she was talking about all the beneficial things that they do. So prebiotics really help to stimulate the growth and activity of our beneficial gut bacteria. And there's a lot of prebiotics that are naturally found in our diet that we can try to increase. And we'll talk about that in a couple of slides here. So just going back, we're going to talk about the postbiotics. Sorry. So again, postbiotics is kind of a newer concept. We're learning more and more about these postbiotics. So are really the end product of our good bacteria, fermenting, eating away at the foods that we feed it. And then the outcome of that are these postbiotics. So as Nikki had mentioned, there's lots of they're non-living components, so short chain fatty acids, vitamins, and other metabolites that are being produced. And those are, again, that's what's helping to provide the health benefits. So that gut barrier function, helping with the immune response, and all of those things. Okay, then we can move on. So as we talked about prebiotics, originally the definition really was that they were fermentable carbohydrates. We thought it was just fermentable carbohydrates in our diets that were really helping that good bacteria flourish. But now the definition keeps expanding because we're learning that there's other food components as well. So one of those would be polyphenols. We're learning that those really help to produce some interesting postbiotics that have really great health benefits. So just some dietary examples of prebiotics. So there's asparagus, whole grains, apples, bananas, garlic, onions, beans, nuts, seeds. These are all good examples of prebiotics and things that we can keep on hand and try to increase our intake of. Okay, so now we're going to just focus on, for the next couple of slides, some dietary changes that we can do to promote a healthy gut microbiome. It's really interesting when they look at kind of the research around the gut microbiome in the diet, and it's showing that your microbiome can change fairly quickly with diet changes. But if you go back to eating the way you were eating prior, the gut microbiome also goes back. So any kind of dietary changes that you make need to be sustainable. So we're going to go through some of those, as you can see on the slide. So getting enough fiber, aiming for diet variety, including fermented foods, reducing red meat and processed meat, as well as foods high in sugar, salt, and saturated fat. All right, so fiber, as we talked about, there's several different types of fibers. Not all fibers are fermentable, so not all fibers are considered prebiotics, but all fiber is really good for our gut health because, again, other fibers will have different roles as far as bowel regularity, helping to keep food moving through the intestine, also helping to add, bulk to the stool. So fiber is a good thing. And it shows that most Canadians were not getting enough fiber. So I think about half of Canadians are getting the amount of fiber that they need. And in Canada, here you can see are the guidelines. So it's actually quite a bit of fiber. So we kind of have to purposely try to get enough fiber. It is important that you add fiber slowly in your diet. You don't want to go too fast so that you don't have kind of those gastrointestinal symptoms. So go slow, and you want to add, make sure that you're drinking more water too as you increase fiber in your diet. So we can go on to the next slide. So how are we going to do that? How can we boost fiber in our diet? So just trading white grains for whole grains would be a good start. You could do, brown rice, whole grain pasta, breads, as well as sprouted grains, some of those ancient grains like barley, bulgur, quinoa. those things would all be great. Aiming for half plate of vegetables at lunch and supper is also a good way to get more fiber in our diets. Having fruit as dessert instead of, something sweet, a cookie, making that swap. As a snack, again, you could have fruit as a snack, pair it with some nuts or seeds. Aiming for a meatless meal per week. So there's lots of great websites and information out there about trying to increase our intake of meatless or doing more meatless meals. So again, having, using canned beans or lentils, soups, roasting chickpeas would be a good snack. So just doing things like that to help increase our meatless meals. And then if you're trying to look at products, again, comparing products, look for ones that have more fiber. So, if you're checking out cereals or crackers or things like that, again, you can compare the fiber in those products. So as well, often labels will have, they'll say like, this is a very high source of fiber. So that would mean that it's about 6 grams of fiber or more. So you can see there kind of which constitutes a source of fiber, high source of fiber, or very high source of fiber. Next slide. All right, so another way to improve the gut microbiome is through diet variety. So this is a very interesting area, and evidence of the importance of diet variety comes from the American Gut Project. So this was a really interesting study. They had 10,000 volunteers throughout the US, UK, and Australia. And what they did is they had people send in a stool sample, and they also had them fill out lots of different surveys, so on diet and other lifestyle factors. And what they found from their research was that people who included more variety in their diet, so had over 30 different plant foods per week, had more beneficial good bacteria and a better diversity, so more diverse gut microbiome compared to people that were only having 10 plant types of foods per week. So again, we know that having a more diverse microbiome is associated with better health. So again, individuals with 30 plant foods or more per week had that more diverse microbiome and more of the beneficial bacteria. Click the next slide. There we go. So just to give us an idea, so 30 plant foods per week kind of sounds like a lot, but we can make it happen. Again, it's all plant foods. So sometimes when people hear plant foods, they're just thinking fruits and vegetables, but that actually includes things like nuts and seeds and whole grains, beans, the lentils, herbs, spices. Those are all included in that 30 or more per week. So one of the things I like to do in my house is we'll do like a big salad and see how many different things how many plants we can add to it. When it comes to fruits and vegetables, thinking color, right? Eating different colors of foods is really important, because when we look back to prebiotics, and I mentioned, dietary compounds such as polyphenols, and that those are showing, good activity in making those postbiotics. So we know that different colored fruits and vegetables contain different polyphenols. So again, eating that rainbow. Buying fresh or frozen can be helpful, especially frozen, so you can have it on hand, fruits and vegetables. They're already ready to go. Again, aiming for half of your plate vegetables, as we talked about, can be helpful. So nuts and seeds, again, mixed nuts. So you can increasing that variety, adding chia or flax or hemp hearts to your yogurt in the morning. Again, whole grains, often we kind of stick with similar grains. So I often will say to people, go to a bulk food store and just pick up 1 cup of something and try it. So then, instead of having to buy a whole bag, just buy a little bit and try it and see if you like it. Again, legumes and lentils, like we talked about, you can make a dip, hummus, using chickpeas, adding edamame to salads, black bean tacos. So just a list of different ideas for you of how you can kind of start to increase your plant variety. Next slide. Okay, so, and if we aim to try to make our plate look like this one, which comes from Canada's Food Guide, which is now evidence-based. So if you were to actually follow this balanced plate, you would see that 3/4 of it is plant-based. So naturally, you would be getting quite a bit of plant-based foods. And where you see the protein foods, you could also, if you made that a meatless meal, and you used, again, beans or lentils, nuts and seeds as your protein, there you would be, again, increasing your plant-based foods. So, and our plates don't always look like this. So sometimes we have mixed meals. So again, those are just examples on the right-hand side of other meals that we could do and how we could, again, get more plants into our diet. So another way to, again, improve the gut microbiome are suggested to have fermented foods. So what really are fermented foods? Basically, the Canadian Digestive Health Foundation defines them as foods that has been changed by microbes. So there's lots of benefits to having fermented foods. Obviously, originally used for food preservation, but also fermentation can really enhance nutrition availability. So it can break down those tannins and phytic acids, which allow other minerals to be absorbed better, such as calcium, iron, magnesium. So the fermentation process can actually help us to absorb more nutrition from our food. They can also improve the digestibility of food. And again, most of them contain fiber as well. So at the bottom here, I have some examples of fermented foods. Sourdough would be one that's here. So again, the definition talks about that foods, being changed by microbes. So most of the other foods listed would actually have live bacterial culture in them. So it is important when you're looking for fermented foods that if you're wanting that live bacterial culture, then they're going to be in the refrigerator section to keep that bacteria alive. So, something like pickles on the list there, they can be fermented or they can just be pickled. So where they're just using a vinegar and then they're processed. So they're not using a live culture to begin with. So again, you really have to be careful of, it just depends what you're looking for. So something like going back to sourdough bread, the end product is not going to contain live bacteria because it is baked. So that's going to kill off the live bacteria. So they're actually, again, they're using a culture. So it is still considered a fermented food and it is going to have the benefit of being, maybe more digestible. However, it's not going to contain that live bacteria. So again, if you're wanting things that are containing that live bacterial culture, you're going to be wanting to look for the refrigerator section.
And sorry, just to interject, because this, I think, got a little bit messed up, sorry, on our screen, but that red circle on the screen here, it actually is supposed to be around the area on the label where it actually lists here live cultures. So you can actually see in this yogurt that it lists under ingredients that there are live bacterial cultures present in that product.
Perfect. Thanks, Nikki. And so it is usually they will list the live cultures on the label as well as finding them in the refrigerator section. So if you want more information about fermented food resources, you can look for cooking classes online. So there's lots of fermented food cooking classes. Again, here's some list of some fermentation books. There's also a really good webinar by the author of The Art of Fermentation that you can check out if you're looking at creating or making some of your own fermented foods at home. Okay, so Nikki, I'll ask you a question now. True or false, are fermented foods considered probiotics?
Yeah, so after kind of listening to all that information you said, I would say that this is actually false. And that's because, as you mentioned, with fermented foods, Well, first off, there's not always live microbes present in fermented foods. And then also, you said for something to be considered a probiotic, we have to know the specific strain that's in there of microbe, and there also has to be a certain dose or amount that we know is associated with a known health benefit. So with a lot of fermented foods, we don't really know the exact strains of microbes that are in there, and we can't guarantee dosage either. One exception to that, and you did mention it, would be Activia yogurt. So that is a fermented food that is also a known probiotic. And that's because we do know what strain of microorganism is in there. We know the amount, and we know that it's associated with potentially improved constipation and helping to manage irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, so the next dietary recommendation that we're going to talk about is reducing red meat and limiting processed meats. So red meat includes beef, pork, lamb, mutton, horse, goat, and veal. And then processed meat is referring to meat that's been transformed through salting or curing, through fermentation, smoking, or through other processes that help enhance flavor or improve preservation. So some good examples of, common processed meats would be things like ham, bacon, sausages, deli meats, beef jerky, and that type of product. So what research has found is that when our gut bacteria feed on and ferment proteins found in red meat, it can actually produce harmful compounds that can lead to an inflammatory response in our body. And there's also this compound in red meat called L-carnitine, and it's found in higher amounts in red meat in particular. And when our gut bacteria interact with this, they actually transform it into a different compound that can increase our risk for cardiovascular disease. When it comes to processed meats, as I mentioned, they contain a lot of additives. And our gut bacteria can interact with some of these additives and actually produce metabolites that are considered toxic and even carcinogenic. So meaning they can potentially cause cancer. So the last recommendation that we're going to talk about is reducing processed and ultra-processed foods. So the USDA defines processed foods as foods that's undergone change to its natural state, and often includes the addition of things like, emulsifiers, preservatives, fat, sugar, or salt. And then ultra-processed foods are basically industry manufactured products that have been deconstructed and then recombined to add a whole bunch of different additives. So what we know about processed and ultra-processed foods is that generally they're really low in fiber. And we just talked about how important fiber is, right, in supporting our gut microbiome and helping to produce those health-promoting compounds. And then because of the lack of fiber, these foods are often digested really quickly in our small intestine, which then decreases food for our large intestine bacteria and can actually result in increased levels of harmful bacteria over time. And then some additives in these foods could also impact gut barrier function, resulting in inflammation. And then lastly, there's also been some research that high salt intake, which again is found often in these types of foods, could decrease certain strains of beneficial bacteria. So for all of these reasons, we really want to try to reduce the process, but especially those ultra-processed foods. So if we're looking for, an overall kind of healthy eating pattern that really puts together all of these recommendations that we've talked about today, then the Mediterranean eating pattern would be a great place to start. So as you can see here at the base of the pyramid, it really emphasizes the importance of physical activity as well as social connections during meal times when possible. Moving up, you'll see a lot of the core foods. So these are the foods that they include on a daily basis. So it's a lot of whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, beans and legumes, herbs and spices. And then olive oil is a main fat that they use in their diet. Fish and seafood are quite prevalent. They recommend that you include it at least twice a week. Poultry and eggs are also included on the Mediterranean diet. And then fermented dairy like yogurt and traditional cheeses are often consumed in moderate portions. And lastly, at the very top, that's where you kind of see the red meats listed. So it's really recommended that you try to limit red meat to twice a week or less when you're kind of following this pattern of eating. You will see kind of water, red wine pictured there. They are typical beverages on this pattern of eating, but as I talked about in the beginning, alcohol could be associated with some changes in our gut microbiome, so we really should be reducing frequency. And also, Canada just updated their drinking guidelines at the end of last year. I don't know if people saw or not, but they are recommending that we reduce our alcohol consumption to 2 drinks a week or less. So looking at this chart, what we wanted to do was kind of show what, a typical Western diet might look like, and then show you guys how we could maybe change that to really increase fiber and plant variety to help promote gut health. So on the left-hand side here, you can see that, a typical day might include a bagel with coffee and butter on the bagel for breakfast. A snack might look like a chocolate chip muffin with a second coffee. Lunch, a spinach salad with chicken and dressing. Afternoon snack is a granola bar. Dinner is potatoes, meats, carrots. And for an evening snack, a cookie and tea. So when we're totaling up the number of unprocessed whole plant foods for this day, we're looking at a total of 4. So how could we alter this, again, to kind of increase fiber and variety? So breakfast, maybe it looks like oatmeal with chia seeds, adding some nut butter and banana slices. For a snack, Melissa mentioned roasted chickpeas. These are great because not only do they provide fiber, they also give some good protein. Lunch, so as Melissa mentioned, right, with salads, instead of just picking one type of lettuce, look for mixed greens. Add things like pepper, cucumber, green onion, olive oil and vinegar dressing, maybe some hard-boiled eggs for protein, and then a scoop of quinoa. For a snack, choosing some mixed nuts. Dinner time, maybe you have a potato seasoned with some garlic, chicken, carrots, and broccoli. And then if you're feeling hungry in the evening, perhaps a fruit like an apple. So overall, this second meal plan option provides a total of 19 different plant foods. So as you can see here, with some little kind of specific changes, we can certainly get to that at least 30 different plant foods per week, because you can see the single day here, we've got 19. Okay, so definitely just kind of being intentional with some of the things that we're including at meal times can really help to increase plant variety and fiber, which again helps support that gut microbiome.
All right, so just moving on to the future. So as we kind of discussed, this is really new, learning. So learning about the gut microbiome and really what is the best gut microbiome for health is really, really kind of new. So people often will ask me, when they hear things about the gut microbiome, you might actually be thinking like, I wonder what's in my gut, right? So what bacteria do I have? So they're looking at doing at-home microbiome test kits. So there is actually a company in Canada that's already doing this. It's called Gut Check. It's quite expensive, and I think the thing to think about is that we don't really know what the best microbiome is for overall health yet at this point. We also don't know what the best way is to alter the microbiome for those changes. What kind of things will be sustainable to create a sustainable microbiome that's beneficial for health. So I think it might be a little bit early to be doing that, unless you have lots of money and you are just curious and interested. But I think that I can definitely see this in the future, that this will be something that we can look at. But again, it's just kind of in its infancy right now. Another approach we can use to treat disease would be by transplanting a donor's microbes. And so this is called a fecal microbiota transplant. And I was actually able to see or be involved in a patient having this done in Toronto when I was interning way back when. So this was a man that had a really bad C. difficile infection. So in Canada, this is still the only condition in which they'll do a fecal microbiota transplant or in research. So who knows, in the future, maybe they'll extend this and they'll find that it's helpful in a treatment of other conditions as well. So again, like we talked about postbiotics, learning about postbiotics is really a new area, and we're learning more and more about those and how they really are what's conferring that health benefit to our bodies. And so when they think about that, you know, we have these probiotic supplements, which are live bacteria. So if we can create postbiotic supplements, this is non-living material. So perhaps it might be a little bit safer to use as a supplement. So again, they're looking at designing some more postbiotic supplements. So again, as we gain more knowledge about the microbiome and what's ideal, then perhaps we can have more precision in the interventions that we use for the gut microbiome. So it's a really exciting and fascinating area. All right, so thank you so much, everyone, for listening today. And so I had a chance to go through some of the questions here. One of the questions was around can probiotics be harmful? And as I did mention, that probiotics are definitely not recommended for people who are immunocompromised or critically ill. So again, I think it's really important that you do check with your healthcare provider if you are going to be taking a probiotic, or if you want some guidance on what probiotic you want to choose. So I hope that kind of answers the question. As well, we had a question just around just general diet for many different things, and many different things. And I would say, when Nikki showed the Mediterranean diet, I think that that's a dietary pattern that's very evidence-based, and I think it can be used for a lot of health conditions. So I hope that also answers the question. We also had a comment just about red meat. So Nikki, just the comment around, that we need red meat for the protein. And so what would we kind of say about that?
Yeah, so protein can be found in a lot of different foods, right? And we're not saying that you have to completely avoid red meat. Again, if we're kind of thinking about that Mediterranean eating pattern, you could still see that red meat is a part of that. It's really kind of, again, thinking about like frequency with it, right? So trying to maybe set that guideline of limiting it to about twice a week. And then other foods that can provide protein at meals would be things like our poultry, eggs, dairy products all have protein in them. And then again, those plant-based proteins are awesome options too, right? So like chickpeas, legumes, lentils, nuts, seeds. So yeah, protein can definitely be found in a lot of other sources outside of red meat as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. So I think sometimes there is confusion around that word, like the idea of plant-based, right? So plant-based does not mean just plants and not having any animal protein at all. So plant-based just means, it's more plant forward, that we're trying to increase the amount of plants that we're having, but not that we're, that we're getting rid of those animal proteins, right? So exactly. Excellent. Okay. And somebody really kindly mentioned that the library is a really great source for finding cookbooks. And they said there's lots of great ones on fermentation at the library. And I find that as well. I love going to the library because there's lots of good cookbooks, and you can kind of pick out recipes that you want to try without having to buy a million cookbooks. So thank you for that.
think someone else too was asking, just sorry, if the information charts that we're showing, if it's going to be posted. So this entire webinar has been recorded and will be uploaded. So the slide content will be a part of that. So you may just have to, if there's certain sections or parts of the webinar you're wanting to see again, you might just have to fast forward a little bit to that area. But yes, you will have all of this content available. And we did list our website down here on the slide, and it's going to be under that patient resource section. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Nikki.
Mhm.
There is also a question around about oats. They're saying oats are getting a bad rap. Are they good for our gut? So yes, I would say oats are definitely a heart health or heart healthy. They're heart healthy, but they're also gut healthy. So yes, oats have that soluble fiber, which is really helpful for having a bulky stool. As well, if you do something like overnight oats, it contains some resistant starch. So there may be some kind of prebiotic benefits there. And certainly oats are a prebiotic. So the beta glucan in the oats is what provides that. So they are definitely foods for that good bacteria in the intestine. So there is a lot of interesting information out there about these resistant starches. So things like, making a potato salad or a pasta salad. So the resistant starch, meaning that they're not, again, fully digested, making their way into the intestine where then they can be fermented. So yeah, so I would say oats are an excellent choice and gut healthy.
Just building on that, I see a question here. Someone had asked, like, what about celiac diets? Because it can be hard to get whole grains. So yeah, with celiac disease, when you have to kind of avoid that gluten, right? Because you have an allergy, fiber is something that we kind of have to be intentional about, right? About where we're getting it. So I just kind of advise people thinking about like naturally gluten-free options like, quinoa or brown or wild rice or potatoes with the skin off on them, adding nuts and seeds to different dishes. And again, like through all those fruits and vegetables and legumes, like all those things are generally gluten-free. Some of those I would suggest, it is advised that you look for it to specifically say that on there just because of cross-contamination. But you absolutely can still get all your fiber needs in through a celiac diet. You just sometimes have to be a little bit more, I guess, intentional about the types of foods that we're including.
And I think, Nikki, this is where we put in our plug, as this is a Nutrition Month
Right.
webinar, is, we are definitely here as family health team dietitians to help. So if you do want to see us individually, you can definitely make an appointment, and we're happy to kind of help you through this process.
Somebody's asking about roasting your own or buying roasted chickpeas. It's a good question. Honestly, if you are able to and you have the time, going the homemade route is always encouraged just because you know what's going into it then, right? Anything that's kind of packaged, it comes back to kind of that processed food, right? Where you really have to be conscious of like, is there added salt here or added fats or sugar? So generally, I do try to encourage people to make your own. It actually can be a very quick process. I usually do it from the canned. Just make sure they're kind of dried. If you have an air fryer, you don't even have to make sure they're dried. You can throw them right in there with the different seasonings. But yeah, I would suggest trying to make it yourself. And if you do have to buy a package, then it really would come down to reading that nutrition facts table and kind of seeing what exactly is in there.
Perfect. Excellent. So I think that brings us to the end of our webinar. Again, thank you so much for attending. And as Nikki mentioned, the recording of the webinar will be on our website. So if you want to let others know, or if you need to have a look at it again, please feel free to do that. We also have lots of other great nutrition resources on our website under patient resources. And if you scroll the left-hand side to nutrition, you'll see that we have quite a few nutrition resources there. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great day. Bye.